Hi, welcome. So today I'm going to talk about how I made the Zephyr build system 100 times faster by adding a little bit of Rust. But Digger is only slightly misleading. So first about me, I'm an embedded software engineer at Cedar Embedded Solutions. We do consulting, mostly focused on industrial prosumer hardware. We do electronics, we do software. So somewhere between C and debugging voltage levels is usually where I end up. We haven't done any organic Rust so far, was because we haven't had any suitable projects for trying it out. But we're definitely also looking with a keen eye on the Rust in Zephyr project that is currently ongoing. In my time, I do use Rust mostly for more high-level stuff like desktop applications, web services, and so on. Okay, so the Zephyr system. Anyone who was at the workshop today, I guess, already is somewhat familiar with it, and everyone else probably as well. It's really quite feat of engineering. If you have a support board, you just type west debug and it flashes it. You get a debugger, you can just debug your program. It's pretty amazing. And if you have a custom board, it's just a little bit of setup to get the same experience as well. Just west debug and everything works. It does come at cost. It's several thousand lines of CMake and Python. Those are rough counts. And in one of our projects, it actually took a really long time to build. So what you can see here is a pristine build, so a complete build with everything. Then I update the timestamp of the maple.cs host file. I don't actually do any code changes, just updating the timestamp. Then I do an incremental build. And it takes 36 seconds just for the incremental build, which at least to me is uncomfortably long. If you add another 10-15 seconds of flashing and initialization and so on, that's a minute between changing code and see what it does. That breaks my throat. So yeah, what is up with that? Okay. First, quick digression. Zephyr userspace. Who has used Zephyr userspace before? Show of hands. Wow. Okay, cool. I'm gonna explain what it is. So usually Zephyr threads can do anything there. So like, of course, there's some restrictions on C language level statics you can't easily access from other source files. But if you have a memory address, you can do whatever you want with it, accidentally or intentionally. Zephyr user space provides a big help there. It uses the MPU if your microcontroller supports it, the memory protection unit, and actually isolates tasks into separate memory areas. By default, a user space task isn't allowed to do anything other than access its current stack, which is not a lot. So what you can do is per thread or kernel object, so for example, mutages, pipes, other threads, and so on, you can say this user space thread is allowed to access this pipe, is allowed to access this mutex, and so on. And that's how user space threads can communicate with other threads. But by default, they can't even access global memory, only their outside. To track who can access which kernel object, there is this struct k object in the Zephyr kernel. For every kernel object that exists, so for every mutex you create, for every pipe you create, there is one such struct k object. It has the name of the object, which is really just the address of the kernel object, so the address of your pipe, for example. It has the conditions, which is 1 bit per thread, which thread is allowed to access this kernel object. But also, is this a pipe, is this a mutex, and so on, and some extra data. The kernel uses this when a user space thread does a syscall, so kpipe put or whatever, please put the data into this pipe. You give it the address of the pipe, and the kernel looks up, okay, what is this? Is this a pipe? Okay, is this thread allowed to access it? And so on. The problem is that this metadata, which the kernel uses to verify accesses, needs to live in protected kernel memory, of course. Otherwise, user space spreads could just modify it and say, yes, I'll access. But the k objects themselves live anywhere in memory. If you just define a mutex somewhere, that lives somewhere in the data section, or it could even live inside a struct that you define. So those are separate things. And now userspace thread comes along with an address of a supposed kernel object that the kernel needs to say, okay, what is this? So there needs to be some mapping from the address of a kernel object that a userspace thread provides to this metadata. The solution is a bit root Goldbergy, but it works. What happens is that your application that's compiled normally completely to an ELF file, which is these Zephyr pre-0, Zephyr pre-1 files. If you've ever debugged a build system, you've probably seen those. Then there's a script that looks at this ELF file and looks at the debug information in this ELF file, which is what usually your debugger uses to map addresses to line numbers to variables and so on. It looks through its debug information, it looks at every single variable declaration in your code and checks, does this variable contain a kernel object anywhere? Is there a mutex in here? Is there? It collects all this information. Now it has all the kernel objects and their addresses. It creates the metadata for them. They are indexed with a perfect hash function, which allows fast lookup from an address to a kernel object, and it's compiled back into the ELF style. So what this looks like is there's this genk object list pi script. It takes your ELF file, your binary, as input, and a struct_tats JSON file, which is another build product from earlier in the build process, and it generates this k-object hash.gperf file, which is the list of all the kernel objects that is. These struct_tats, which are the second input to the file, are just a list of all the types in the Zephyr codebase that are considered kernel objects. So here we can see the net socket, which is anything that looks like a network socket. Of course, those have permissions. Userspace spreads aren't allowed to just send anything to network sockets. You can say you're allowed to send to this socket. And the subsystems, so for example, every GPIO device is a separate kernel device. You can say this userspace spread is allowed to access this GPIO device. And that's what the script uses to figure out what a kernel object is. And in this output, it generates this gperf file, which has a very funky looking address in every line. It's extremely literal for reasons you can ask me later if you want to know. And then the rest is this metadata. So here the 0 is which threads are allowed to access it, none, and then the type of the kernel object and so on. So this is the mapping from the address of every kernel object to its metadata. Okay, so that was a quick explainer for kernel user space and how the kernel objects are tracked. So we have a problem. Our build is slow. 36 seconds for an incremental build. What do we do? Actually, very helpful here. Ninja, the build tool that Wes uses by default to build your code, already outputs very precise timing information for every build task it does. So when it started, when it ended, I think it took now a second per series. It's just a plain file, and someone wrote a tool that converts this plain log file from Ninja to a Chrome tracing JSON. Comes from the Chrome browser. It's used widely for all sorts of performance and tracing work now. You can then load this JSON file into any visualizer for this format, in this case, like Feta. What we can see here is in a pristine build, so complete build with everything. As you explained, this graph is time goes from left to right, and from top to bottom we have different build threads. At the start we have this big colorful blob. That's the actual compilation step. You can see all the build threads are active, which is what we want. We want as much parallelism as we want. But then after that, for most of the graph is actually just a single thread doing all the work for, well, 30-ish seconds. And what happens here is two invocations of this genk object list.py file. So for most of the build, we're actually waiting on this single script. It gets even worse in an incremental build because we have none of the build compilation work, so the single file that change. So 31 out of 36 seconds of build time are spent in this script. That's slow. What do? We rewrite the rules. So I could have debugged the Python code, but this was fun. So it's approximately 1,000 to 1,200 lines of code. I ported it mostly one-to-one line by line. A couple idiomatic changes, and they used more libraries for the debugging for parsing. A lot of that was done by hand with byte juggling in the Python. But along with that, one-to-one design. And it's a 100% drop-in replacement for the Python script. So the same command line argument, same output. And By now, it's even detected automatically by the upstream build system. So if you have this Rust rewrite in your path, it gets used instead of the Python program. So what do? We install this Rust program, we do another pristine build, we touch the source file again, do to another incremental build, and it takes 5 seconds now. Step 36, up to user iteration times. Compared to before, 36 seconds. 5 seconds is useful. Of course, we need to do benchmarks again because we want to know what we did. This is a pristine build again, and you can see almost the entire build time is spent in compilation with 16 threads in parallel and a little bit of single-threaded work at the beginning. And a incremental build is still only single-threaded, but of course it takes a 7/8 of the time. And you can probably not see it very well, but it's onto different tasks and there's no big outliers. They all take about the same amount of time. So there's no big optimization potential anymore. Maybe you can guess where the GenK object list Rust implementation is in this run. Probably not. It's these two. So before it was almost half the build time, now it's these two things. And actually for the first one, we're waiting on another build task in parallel, so it's only 200 milliseconds that we spent on this build step now, instead of 31 seconds. Of course, for good project tests, so I wrote a test script that allows you to compare two implementations of this program. You run it with both implementations and it compares the outputs. And except for some small formatting changes, the output of the original Zephyr Python script and my Rust rewrite is bit for bit identical. And it's also useful for performance comparison. Before we were testing the entire West build flow. Now we can just test the script in isolation and we can see about Python takes a long time at Rust. It's about 80 times as fast now. This is where the slightly misleading number in the title comes from. When I wrote the abstract, I had old numbers than when I wrote the script, and it was actually 100 times as fast back then. Apparently, I the script just stopped a little bit faster by now, so it's at 80 times as fast. But close enough. Okay, so if you have any slow config user space builds, probably not because no one's using it yet. But if you do, give it a try. It's on GitHub. You can just install it with Carver install. The slides will also be on the Zephyr talk later. If you have questions, sure.
So why does the script run twice?
Because with config user space, there's actually two decking steps. This is not the only thing that gets taken out of the ELF binary, processed and then put back in the ELF binary. That happens again for other stuff. So
It's nicht was doing was often first.
yes, this. I can recommend looking into this half to CMake. It's in the main CMake lists file. It's very interesting. Lots of stuff gets pushed around in the ELF file and placeholders and everything. And it's all. Yeah.
Before I was also working with files and adding this in JSON fix there. And there are also the Python like so that. And so where you came up spread was yeah, magic tool, let's say this way. Another just out of interest.
I'm sure there's optimization potential in the original Python script as well, for example, by using native code, ELF, and Dwarf parsing libraries. But debugging Python performance isn't fun, and writing Rust is, so that's what I do.
Do you see any steps to make this like the default for everyone who's building? Do you see other parts of the build system migrating to Rust with the same speed of diesel?
I don't think there are any big performance potentials like that anymore. At least in the builds I do, everything looks kind of same. There's no big outliers anymore. I have considered upstreaming this to Zephyr, but as far as I know, no part of the build system currently uses Rust. So it would be a big infrastructural change to introduce this. Every build would try out Arbor and Rust compiler and so on. The current solution with the changes upstream that you can simply have this rewrite in your path this binary and it gets used automatically by West, I think is the best solution.
Can't we put the binary of that new program in the SDK?
You could probably,
Because I mean, we don't need to compile GCC for.
yeah, sure. I guess I should talk to the SDK. Get about that.
So what do you believe is the main driver of the insanely bad performance of the Python version? Because if it's line by line, then the algorithm has not really changed, right?
No, there's no obvious algorithmic changes in the high-level code of the tool. I did not look very deeply into how the ELF parsing, dwarf parsing, and so on is implemented in the Python tools, or it also uses a binary. I just re-implemented those calls basically with another library. It's possible that this dwarf parsing library is very inefficient somewhere, but I didn't debug the performance phase continue. So I'm sure there's performance gains to be had there. Okay. I think that was it. If you come up with any further questions, I'll definitely be here in the networking time later. I have to go for a bit. Or just write me an email. The slides will also be. Thank you.